Well, it's also right after lunch, so.
That's true.
Afternoon, everybody. It's time for our 2 o'clock special. We have with us this afternoon Jack Daniels. A little bit about Jack. I've got a little bit of a bio here that I can share with you. Oh, sorry. I'll shorten it. Jack is co-founder of Security BSides and works for Tenable. Jack has over 20 years' experience in network and system administration and security, and he has worked in a variety of practitioner and management positions. Jack is a technology community activist, a frequent speaker at technology and security events, and is a contributor to Paul's Security Weekly podcast. Jack is a CISSP, holds CCSK, and is a Microsoft MVP for enterprise security. Jack's subject today is the shoulders of InfoSec. Jack likes to use a quote from Sir Isaac Newton: "If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants." This is a quote from Isaac Newton. All of us in the field of information security stand on the shoulders of giants. This project is dedicated to shining a light on those shoulders, the known and unknown. In this presentation, Jack will tell the stories of some foundation figures in our industry and communities, some famous, some infamous, some unknown. Let's give an ISC squared welcome for Jack Daniels.
So I'm going to BSides, and therefore this is actually a presentation in 2 acts, and I'm going to mess with you.
It's starting out just right, isn't it?
What did I just do to you? Is that's a French pop version of the song you were expecting to hear. So in some places I may go astray and you may not see things that you expect. But that's me. I'm good at tangents. So it's a 2 acts here. Welcome to Security BSides. One of the things I like to do at BSides events is point out that you are here. I know some people partied a bit last night. I think you all know this. What's really important to notice about this, though, is not that we are here. It's that we're here and we're part of this BSides community. And for those that aren't aware of it, you're also part of this BSides community. In July of 2009, a handful of us got together and said, why don't we make this thing happen so we can give voices to people who have content that's cool, but maybe doesn't fit in more commercial places. Maybe a little less commercial, a good conversational space. Did it on a whim. We weren't trying to change the world. We were just trying to have some fun. This is Security BSides event number 387 globally since July of 2009. Events have been held in 121 cities in 36 countries around the world since we did our little one-time event. They're all decentralized, so all of the folks in green shirts make this happen. The sponsors, the speakers, and those of you who are here as participants make this happen. It's a community thing. There are firm dates on the securitybsides.org wiki for 45 more events in 2018, and a lot of them spin up on short notice. There will be probably 80, 82 of them this year globally. Riyadh, Saudi Arabia has got a new one. Cairo has one coming up. Dubai has a second one. There's one in Indonesia coming up. There's a third one in Singapore coming up. This one's been going on and growing. They range in size from a few dozen people to thousands, and it is amazing. Probably in the years, I said, and we're all part of it. The original idea was to just share some interesting content and have some conversations about it. And when we do that, we connect, build, and strengthen our communities. And when we do that, we kind of help people's careers down the road. And so that's BSides. And one of the things I like to talk about too is I'm not going to make fun of any other conferences that get overly commercial and do weird things, but what it takes to grow. Actually, I should back up. All those question marks are probables or possibles. I've had conversations. Actually, the Harare, Zimbabwe is looking more likely. Cuba is kind of, not sure about that one. Cairo looks more likely. What else is cooking? The green dots are first-time ones that haven't happened yet. So this is a growing community, too. Those green dots are ones that are on the calendar but haven't happened yet for this year. So we're a growing community. So what happens when you add an addition onto your house? You have to add on the foundation. So unlike places that have like a founder circle BS, whether this, like me, is your 69th B-Sides and 37th time speaking of B-Sides, or if this is your first entry into B-Sides, first security conference, you're part of the foundation of this. We're all part of it together. So first or 100th B-Sides, welcome, and thank you for being part of the Founders Circle. With that said, anybody here the first time at a security conference or first time at a B-Sides? Any news? Cool. Hey, I don't know anything anymore, but I know a lot of people who do. I've gotten a lot less technical over the years. But if you need anything, I mean this, and some of you know I'm serious. Reach out. Connect. We'll get you. We'll see what we can do forward. It's an interest, whether it's personal, professional, or whatever, because that's what we do at B-Sides, is we make connections. And the rest of you can do stuff like that here, too, for the rest of the day and elsewhere. Because you may have noticed we've got some challenges, and if we don't work together, we're kind of screwed. On that, I'm not going to dwell on this. This is another presentation I do. Other things, I'll touch on it in Virginia next week. But just a reminder to take care of yourself and others. The world's stressful. Turns out some people are assholes. Nobody here I know, but if you live online, I've heard sometimes people aren't really kind. So don't let it get you down. Take care of yourself and take care of others. That's how we get through this. So now with what we're actually going to talk about, shoulders of InfoSec. And the first disclaimer comes up. I am ignorant. I started this project years ago because I needed to learn stuff because I didn't know stuff about how we got where we are in the industry. But don't laugh at me, we all are. We're all ignorant, that's why we're in InfoSec, because we like to learn. That was the story they told us. Sometimes it would be nice if we could kind of slow down the pace of stuff. Really? Stop. So we don't have a chance to look back, right? That's one of the challenges. How did we get here? Why are we here? Well, we're here for B-Sides, but how did we get here? What is it doing for us? So here's one of the things I realized. It's kind of hard to say. Now, if I wanted to talk about music, we could do some interesting things with music. There are all sorts of approaches. I'll take this one for now. Let's look at the teams through the 60s and 70s. A little Middle Eastern folk music. Come forward into the 20s. This is really going somewhere, believe me. Let's move into the 40s and Chicago. Now let's move into the 50s and see what happens with rock and roll. That's Link Ray, not in the Pop Music Hall of Fame. The sign on the door of the Pop Music Hall of Fame says rock and roll, but they lie. That's the father of power chord. He was a country musician transitioning to this newfangled rock and roll thing, and somebody asked him to improvise a stroll in the 50s. And this is a guy that liked to push limits, and he invented the power chord. He took that and just laid down on that and went, wow, what was that? That was the sound of rock and roll changing forever, becoming a foundation for the music that old farts like me grew up on. and still cling to instead of that DJ thumpy thump oons oons shit the kids listen to these days. Sorry, a little editorializing. But anyway, Lipner did some interesting things. I mean, if you're into heavy metal shredding, guess where that kind of got its start? That's the key to jazz and other things, where it sounds the same, but you realize it's ever so slightly different. He shreds and then hammers with a power chord. Gee, that didn't define rock for decades. And actually, the less horrible things that pass for country have a lot of that left in them. They don't have any soul left in them. And then he also liked to abuse electronics. Before there were any tools, he would do things like stick a pencil through the speaker cones to get buzzing noises. He would turn up the vibrato. Started playing with stuff that hadn't been done before. And at the same time, one of his peers within a few years, he takes it to what we would recognize as, classic rock as one of the precursors to it. If you're a Tarantino fan or a music fan, you've certainly heard Miserlou, Dick Dale's. So we brought that back to that folk music and electrified the folk music. And then we have this path. We can follow these threads through music. That blues stuff, there were some British kids who really liked blues, but they made it a little electric. So we've got a path through the teens, 20s, and 30s, and 40s, into the 50s, and 60s, and 70s. And if we go back to the 60s, there are bands that a lot of people haven't heard of. One in particular I like to talk about. Most of their stuff, by the way, if you go and look up the Sonics, you will discover most of their stuff is crap. It's horrible covers, it's cheesy garbage, and every now and then there's something like this. That was 1965. That was punk several years before punk. That was grunge decades before grunge. Jerry Rosalie vocals are just amazing. He has a primal scream that's just amazing. And, what's the significance? There are a few people who have said that Jerry Rosalie and the punk or the Sonics really influenced their musical direction. Bruce Springsteen, Nirvana, White Stripes, the Cramps, the Dead Boys, the Flaming Lips, all look back to the Sonics. I didn't go with Velvet Underground, that's too easy, right? The story, they sold 30,000 albums and every one of them led to at least one band. That's easy. What else if you want to go into a little modern musical history stuff? It might get loud. If you're into electric guitars and haven't seen It Might Get Loud, just do that. Forget it. Forget whatever you were going to Netflix. It's just watch It Might Get Loud. I used to be bad with names, then I got old. Now I'm not even going to remember. But it's him, and then what's his name from Zeppelin? Anyway, it's a killer electric guitar thing, and there's a scene of Rumble that's truly amazing. If you want another take on it, you want to go in a different direction, follow Herbie Hancock's career. Listen to the first half of the audio book of his autobiography. The second half sucks. But the first half is great. There are all sorts of great anecdotes in there. And, he went from being a classical music, a classical child prodigy to, foundational figure in hip-hop and all sorts of things, through all sorts of crazy jazz and funk. And it's transition. BBC Radio 4 did a documentary on the song Summertime from Porgy and Bess. And if you know it became like a Brazilian jazz standard. And then if you're my age, Janice sang it, and that changed the world. We're down here where it gets hot and sticky. On a summer day, go out and just like absorb the unbelievable heat and crank that up. Anyway, so what's the point? Where's that concise history of how we got here in our industry? Well, here's a little look into it, because so I look back. Part of it is this. Everyone's not gone. Some of these early figures were around. That's actually a transition to this project statement. Let's take a minute and look at why we don't know this. Well, things were different in the old days. Security was something that happened as part of computing. It wasn't really a separate thing until the late 60s, early 70s. It was just like a thing you did. And actually, it wasn't a thing you did, and then we had problems, and you fixed it. It wasn't a business. Arguably, one of the folks coming up was the first independent consultant on that, and that was late 60s, early 70s before that was a thing. Before that, you just did. We can't keep up, right? If you're in this industry, you run to keep up. You don't have time to look over your shoulder and figure out how we got where we are. We have to keep running. By the way, that's part of the reason we have the same problems over and over and over again. We find new ways to make old problems. We'll talk about that in a minute, too. If it doesn't come up in a Google search, does it exist? Well, a lot of the foundational work predates the internet. A lot of it's government, a lot of it's military, and not readily available. Yeah, there's some silos. This is one that some of you I know very much. There are all these silos, like military and government and higher ed and academia and industry, and then industry splits into like those of us in Vendorland versus those of you that are securing your own environment, and then there's the consultants, and everybody else is an idiot because they don't feel your pain the way you do, and so we don't do that. It's one of the things that BSides and some of the community events help bring us together. A lot of the folks aren't around to tell their stories anymore. Many of them have retired. Some of them have passed away. And, sadly, a few of them are in administrative or policy roles or something even worse. A lot of them are not on the con circuit. They're still out and active, or certainly not on our con circuit. So let's start with some folks that you know, or at least know their names, and talk about them. So everybody certainly knows Alan Turing. Okay, maybe you know the name, what's his name, Bumblebee, or whatever the heck it is. Alan Turing, right? So everybody knows this story. And if you don't, then it's easy enough. It's easy to find out about Turing. He's why we have computers. But I like to talk about Doc Keene. Doc Keene was an engineer. He carried a doctor's bag with him. And that's where he kept his drafting and engineering tools. That's how he got the nickname, was the tools he used. He is the one that took this brilliant guy's ideas and turned them into an engineering plan that could actually be assembled. It took somebody who was a people person, damn it, to translate from the engineer to the mechanic. And he oversaw the construction of the bomb bug. And by the way, he didn't solder all those pieces himself. It took somebody else in the trenches. Thankless job that being in the trenches is, right? Some of you. So it took these people in between. Turing didn't do this himself. He didn't burn his fingertips trying to solder crap with 40s era soldering irons. But it took Doc and a whole bunch of other people for Turing's stuff to come in. Not to diminish Turing's brilliance, but we don't do this alone, right? We do this together. But a lot of folks have never heard of Henryk Zygalski or his partner, I won't even try these, or Marian Rejewski. First, Zygalski came up with this little paper card thing in the late 30s. And it was really handy because the three of them did the math and Zygalski put it on paper, and this broke the Enigma ciphers. This is why it took a computer to break the Enigma later in the war, because three Polish mathematicians broke the original, or the earlier Enigma ciphers on paper. Their story doesn't get told too often. So you'll hear this a few more times. All of our work is derivative. when we invent things, more of these stories, but this is what kept Poland safe until the invasion. They had an idea what was going on until superior hardware. Gross oversimplification. But they were able to do some amazing things, this trio. So let's get into more modern things. Everybody knows these two guys, Diffie-Hellman, Marty. We all use their ideas continuously. New Directions in Cryptography was published in '76. Radical new method of distributing cryptographic keys that far towards solving the fundamental problems of key distribution. And it's imperfect, and it still kind of works. So that's the Diffie-Hellman key exchange. It's kind of cool because you can exchange keys securely in an insecure environment. Again, broad brush. Witt was its son forever, but he's really concerned, like a lot of early cryptographers, crypto folks, he's really concerned about individual rights and privacy. Marty is interested in physical security. He's an early and continuing activist and advocate in the Beyond War movement. He runs the site nuclear.org and has for a long time. These are actual human beings with concerns and cares about the world around them, not just math. Pretty cool dudes. This guy gets screwed all the time. Ralph Merkle. If you're into crypto, you probably heard of Ralph. You might have heard of Merkle trees. If you haven't heard of Merkle trees, maybe we should talk about blockchain and cryptocurrencies and stuff because, guess where that foundational logic comes from? This dude that is usually cut out of that picture. Computer scientist, one of the inventors of public key crypto, invented cryptographic hashing, researcher and speaker on molecular nanotechnology and cryonics, devised a scheme for communication over an insecure channel, Merkle's puzzles, as part of a class project while an undergraduate. Early example of public key, co-invented stuff with Hellman. Here's another trio. We all know these guys. Here, they're in the correct order. So Ron Rivest invented a bunch of symmetric key algorithms, RC2456. RC is usually described as either being Rivest cipher or locally Ron's code. Authored MD2, MD4, MD5, MD6. Also published the 3-ballot voting system. This is kind of timely. He did this a long time ago. System which does not rely on cryptography. Because Ron Rivest says our democracy is too important to trust computers and crypto. Imagine that. And when he invented it, it went straight into the public domain. 3-ballot voting system is basically 3 ballots. It's a way to prove that your vote was counted while still being secret. And it's what a crazy idea. And it can be done on paper so you can see it. It's real. Adi Shamir is one of the inventors of differential cryptanalysis and co-invented an interesting identification scheme. I won't try to pronounce the names. Lynn, besides theoretical computer science and crypto, is known for DNA computing. He's been interested in using biologic computing instead of silica-based computing. Interesting folks. And, they're still around. But unless you're a crypto history nerd, you don't know these things. And there's a good reason for it. Because these folks come out of GCHQ. Jim Ellis, in 1970, had kind of like a thought experiment and made a paper out of it. And the paper, he described the ideas for doing what he called non-secret encryption. How does that work? Well, for decades, we've called it public key cryptography. A couple of years ago, a couple of years later, Clifford Cox, in '73, joined GCHQ. Brilliant mathematician. I believe he was out of Oxford. They weren't sure what to do with the smart kid, so they handed him Ellis's paper. He started playing with it and discovered a few things and invented a few things and came up with a really solid working crypto system. Today we would call it RSA. Clifford Cox went on to invent identity-based crypto. Oh, there's something that we're talking about now. Tying our personal identity to our crypto, which locks, what a crazy idea, 73. He went on to be the chief mathematician of GCHQ, which is I don't want to offend the folks at the table out there. That might be more impressive than chief mathematician at NSA, given the history of GCHQ. But it's pretty damn impressive anyway. He retired as chief mathematician at GCHQ. He had a college boy, Malcolm Williamson, joined GCHQ about a few months later, after Clifford Cox, and read the same paper. And in '74, he figured out a way to securely exchange cryptographic keys on an untrusted network. Sound familiar? Yeah. Diffie-Hellman did this a few years later. None of this was declassified until 1997, until we had been using RSA and Diffie-Hellman for a couple of decades. Ellis didn't live to see it become public. So here's a couple of interesting things. When you discover something, invent something, move something down move something forward, stop and think, be a little bit humble about it. But then the other really important point is don't be discouraged. Don't be, that's one of the things that some of the people that I admire that have done some really brilliant work, and they're like, I did this thing, and like 2 or 3 days later, they're like, I'm an idiot. It took me like 6 months to figure out a new class of bugs that shattered everything in the world. Like, no, you're not. But what's really important is somebody beat the people we credit with foundational security, crypto, to doing the work. But the people that did it didn't do much with it inside GCHQ. The guys that later discovered the same things and invented the same things changed the world. So a little bit of humility, but don't let that slow you down. Don't get grabbed by imposter syndrome. Take what you figured out, run with it. Just kind of look around and say, hey, anybody else figure this out? No? Oh, hey, you did? We should you and I should work together, and then we're going to make the world a better place. Sorry for being idealistic. That happens sometimes. So 12 people, some you know, some you may not. We're going to start with arguably the first hacker of the electronic age. Nevil Maskeline, who's a magician, dandy, inventor, hacker. Invented the pay toilet. That was a big deal in Victorian England. But he's here because Marconi was proving the security and wonder of his wireless telegraph. And there were investors and others in a parlor in London waiting for the message. Guys reading off the things as it goes clickety-click. And the message was an obscene limerick about Marconi because Maskeline did a man-in-the-middle attack on the wireless in 1903, proving the insecurity of Marconi's wireless telegraph. You don't need don't need karma at the Starbucks to do this. Admiral Grace Hopper, hopefully everybody knows her stories. If not, you've got homework. She wrote the first compiler because she got tired of writing all of the code out by hand. When she started programming, you programmed with patch tables. It was a major advancement in her career when they moved to dip switches instead of having to use tables. She's why we talk about debugging. If you don't know this story, the early computers had mechanical relays, mechanical switches. There was a moth stuck between the contacts of one, and a program didn't run. So she found it and pulled it out and debugged for the first time. And if you want a quick introduction, just how pure awesome she is, she did an interview with David Letterman. You can find it on YouTube. It gets a little weird at the end, but she was famous for having little pieces of wire that she referred to as a nanosecond. And I was going to ask, it's one of the things that people are very proud of. If you got a nanosecond from her, that's a big deal. And the thing was, she was asked why it took so long to get messages to ships at sea, and her response was, this is how far data can travel in a nanosecond. And it's got to go from here to the satellite. And that was the way she made this very real connection. She used to travel with pockets full of nanoseconds. She retired 3 times from the Navy. The first 2 times they brought her back. Spaff is a dear friend. He is a professor in computer science at Purdue. He's actually tenured in like 6 or 7 different things. He founded the Sirius Institute at Purdue, which was like the first really rigorous PhD program for information assurance and information security. Pioneered in many fields of computer science and security. Here's the list. He's a professor of philosophy, communication, electrical and computer engineering, and political science at Purdue. Pretty cool dude, rocks the bow tie. Folks like Dan Farmer, Gene Kim, and way too many to mention have been students of his. Advisor to industry, government, military. He's also an InfoSec historian. He gets mad at me when I say that, but he's not as old as people think he is, but he's been around and he pays attention. And the reason I call him that is in the Shoulders of InfoSec project, a lot of the people that I have written about had to borrow from his obituary or memorials to the folks that we've lost. So he's done a lot of things on his own. Great sense of humor, rocks the bow tie, and is a very fan of very nice single malt whiskeys. This one still hurts. For those of you that knew Becky Bace, you know how much of a hole there is in our world. She had the nickname Infomom. For years, she had the nickname the Den Mother of Intrusion Detection when she was at NSA. She caught me referring to her as that at a conference a few years ago, and told me that I was no longer allowed to call her that. She was sick of it, and I had to call her the cranky broad. So I've left that in there. We lost her about a year ago. Den Mother of Ideas. She was at NSA for years. She was a, let's see, she was, her mom was from the other side of the Pacific. Her dad met mom during the war. They came back. She grew up in South Alabama she went on to do cool stuff at the NSA. She and her partner did some really cool stuff afterwards, in spite of being a woman of color at the time that didn't happen. But when she left South Alabama to go to the government and marry a Yankee, her dad said, hey, when you're done with that, you come home because we need help down here. She ended her career as a professor at the University of South Alabama, not the Roll Tide guys, the ones that really need somebody like Becky. Because she promised her dad she would. That, to me, tells you more about her than her career at NSA and her consulting career. She made things better for young people in South Alabama. She passed away a year ago. It tore up those of us who knew her. Sort of right now. She also, some of the best hugs on the planet. Boy, could she hug. Oh, man, the world was a better place. Anyway, we miss her. If you don't know about her, you look around and you'll find people. And those of us that knew her well feel that we owe the rest of you something because that's the way she was. She left us a little homework, Professor Bace did. Robert T. Morris. Some people wonder why I put him in here. He's the guy that wrote The Worm. Well, there's some interesting stuff there. He wrote The Morris Worm, that's right. 1988, Morris Worm was unleashed. All hell broke loose in the internet. He's why we have a cert. SPAF did the original forensic analysis on it. Even though we had the code, it was like, how did this tear apart the way it did? How did it run the way it did? That's why we have a cert. SPAF did the forensic analysis. He was the first person convicted under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. 3 years probation in 1990, or he was convicted 89, 3 years of probation starting in 90. That's as much as anyone knows if you know that much. So, what else? There are some people that get touted as reformed hackers, and I'm not going to make fun of Nick here, but I mean, he's doing cool stuff with his training now. But you hear about him because, you know, Kevin can promote himself. That's part of what he does, right? What you probably don't know about this dude is he's the co-founder of both Y Combinator and BioWeb. He has been a tenured professor of computer science and electrical engineering at MIT since 2006. That's a thing, by the way. Tenured professor in CS and EE at MIT, that's kind of a thing. He has taught thousands and thousands of students at one of the most prestigious engineering schools in the world. That's, you know, that's kind of a thing. It's possible for some people to do dumb shit as kids and move forward. So I've heard. This is interesting. His dad was an NSA at the time. He worked at Bell Labs for a long time and worked on Multics and newfangled Unix stuff when it came out. He was an NSA. He was an NSA when his son was rolled up. I've heard the story of the FBI needing to get cleared to roll into Fort Meade, go into a conference room, and tell this dude that they were rolling up his son at college. Apparently it was an awkward day. And apparently the normal, as you can imagine, FBI special agents like to be the alpha males, went into Fort Meade. No longer alpha. I had a couple of quotes that I love. Never underestimate the attention, risk, money, and time that an opponent will put into reading traffic. Decades ago. It's like, oh, wow, that's still true. More so than ever. Rule number 1 of cryptanalysis, check for plain text. Anybody ever done those crypto challenges and struggled when something was in clear text? Turns out that works at the NSA level, too. And he had 3 golden rules to ensure computer security. First, do not own a computer. Second, if you own a computer, do not turn it on. If you must turn it on, do not actually use it. There are shrubberies that outside where his office used to be at NSA, which I think have finally recovered, but he was a chain smoker. He used to venture out chain smoke and then burn shrubberies as he'd throw the cigarette butts on the ground. That was one of the stories I heard from several folks inside the joint. The computer will touch men everywhere and in every way, almost on a minute-to-minute basis. Every man will communicate through a computer. Whatever he does, it will change and reshape his life, modify his career, and force him to accept a life of continuous change. There are people around us, not here, but there are people around us who don't believe this is true. They're wrong. However, Willis Ware told us that in 1966. 1966, he told us that. Turns out he was right. He was kind of a smart dude. Worked on classified radar and the IFF, Identify Friend or Foe, systems in the war. Was at RAND for 40 years. His report, the Ware report, was issued in initially issued 67, final was 71. Its fundamental value hasn't diminished in the past 50 years. If you take some time and read the Ware report, it looks dated. And then if you change a few words, it doesn't look as dated. And you bring up some of the graphics and change some of the labels in the graphics, it's like, oh, we still have to worry about operator trust. We still have to worry about side channel. We have to worry about leakage. It's all fundamental. It's amazing. And decades before as a popular concern, he predicted that increased reliance on computers would present serious privacy issues. So before people had computers. Like, hey, this is going to happen, and you know what? Our privacy is at risk because of it. In 74, we got the first Privacy Act because of him. Dorothy Denning, she's an interesting character. She's flipped back and forth on her view of hackers. She was originally sympathetic, and then she wasn't so sympathetic, and then she was on what I would say the wrong side of the Clipper Chick thing. She earned the nickname the Clipper Chick, which she hates, and that stuff. She established a mathematical basis for enforcing information security in a computer system in 76 in a paper. She was a professor at Purdue, then SRI, in Georgetown. Now both she and her husband, I think they're both still at the Naval Postgrad School. So yeah, just amazing. Steve Lipner is still around. He was at Microsoft for years. He wasn't a security specialist, but his first job out of school, he was at MITRE, and he agreed to work on system security until they could find the right person. He's been in the field since then. Contributor to the Orange Book, Microsoft Trustworthy Computing. A couple of months ago, we had him on Paul's Security Weekly. It's a fantastic interview. Give it a listen. He's got some great insights, specifically about the Orange Book. We talked about that briefly, why the Orange Book was a failure. Because it did what it did, but it didn't take into account the fact that people actually have to use these stupid computers, not just be secure with them. Back to don't own it, don't turn it on, don't use it. That's secure, but not productive. hero of sorts for me. I never got to meet the guy. Several friends knew Bob Abbott. One of the things I loved is he did a thing called a RESOS, Research in Secure Operating Systems paper, and trying to identify security issues. And I'll go through these quickly, we're winding down on time. But they identified 7 key problems in computer security. And I want a disclaimer, right? It's easier to identify a problem than to fix it. But if you don't identify them clearly, you're not going to fix them. So in the early 70s, they came up with this list that starts with incomplete parameter validation and moves on to inconsistent parameter validation, implicit sharing of privilege or confidential data. We're still chasing those, aren't we? Asynchronous validation or inadequate serialization, what we would normally call race conditions and time to checkout versus time to use. Yeah, we fixed those, right? Boy, inadequate identification, authentication, and authorization. Prohibition, violable prohibitions and limits. You can't do that. Well, the code lets me screw you. And then exploitable logic errors. Those are the 7. Don't get too disappointed. We've really driven a lot of those out of the kernel. And in many cases, out of the OS, right into the application layer. Author the first set of privacy and data confidentiality policies for healthcare, developed the first multi-user, multitasking OS for Cray to go into 24/7 operational deployment, produced the first physiological monitoring system for open heart surgery patients, and for those who've seen the movie Sneakers, the Red Team was based on his team at NSA. Every one of those people maps directly to somebody that worked for him in the original offensive security team at NSA. At the end, the James Earl Jones character from the agency was named Bernard Abbott in a nod to Bob Abbott. Winding down. Jim Anderson. Contributions were all over the place, but since we're running light on time, I want to just read one thing. Spaff's obituary, tribute to him. Anderson had broad interests, deep concerns, great insight, and a rare willingness to operate out of the spotlight. His sense of humor and patience with those earnestly seeking knowledge were greatly admired, as were his candid responses to the clueless and self-important. Anderson eschewed public recognition of his many accomplishments, preferring that his work speak for itself. So I'm sitting here in my silly costume, so I'll kind of like hang my head in shame over the public recognition thing, but humor and patience with those earnestly seeking knowledge. Hey, we're at BSides. Guess why I like this dude? And I'm going to leave you with this guy for this part of the thing. Ethical hacker is an interesting term. I hate it. This hacker should be neutral. Don't get me started on responsible disclosure. Responsible is a loaded weapon, and the weapon tends to point in one direction. But if you want to go there, he was a punch card computer expert prior to what we think of as computers. But you know, in over a century ago, punch cards were computational machines. He was an expert. Early on, he was at the census in France in the 30s and 40s. And he was there through the Vichy government and appeared to cooperate with the Vichy government. He sabotaged the Nazi census of France. He was the only one that knew that system at the level he did and sabotaged it. He saved literally unknown, untold thousands of lives. We don't know. Hundreds anyway, thousands more likely, many thousands is likely. Because he used his superior knowledge to hide people with a computer. And towards the end of the war, he was arrested, imprisoned, and died in Dachau. So when somebody says they're like a political activist and defaces a website, yeah, you know, died at Dachau is a bit more hardcore as far as a ethical hacker. So back to that quote that he did at the introduction. And actually, this was borrowed from one of his mentors. I've seen farther by standing on the shoulders of giants. Shoulders of InfoSec.org. There's a wiki there. I'm always looking for more people to be part of it. A bunch of people helped me make this happen. At that, you'll find these people and many more. There are a bunch of people that are going to come on over the next few months. And I will, little shameless self-promotion, I'm on Twitter. If you like diversions, apparently people are entertained by InfoSec Noir. This is my serialized cyber private eye noir thing that some people are entertained by. I do it to amuse myself. Sometimes others are entertained. But I want to leave you with this thought. This is not the end. It's the end of my talk. It's not the end of the day. It's the beginning of everything that comes after this. And I want to come back to the idea of the shoulders of InfoSec. It's not about the giants of InfoSec. It's about the people that provide shoulders for others to stand on. That's what makes you a giant, is providing the shoulders. You don't become a giant. People do, and they tend to fade, but people like Becky Bace make a difference. You don't have to be a giant to provide shoulders for others to stand on. And as a matter of fact, as you provide shoulders to those that need them, you become a giant. Thank you very much.